Let's go back to our focus for this day now. South Africa's crumbling infrastructure under the spotlight. One of the biggest problems facing Eskom is the utility's aging power stations. Their lack of maintenance has led to rolling blackouts, which Eskom says could last for at least 18 months. The delays in adding new generation to the grid from Medupi and Kusile power stations has added to Eskom's inability to provide a reliable energy supply. Let's unpack this further now with our engineer, Dr. Andrew Dickson, who joins us virtually. Andrew, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. We've been discussing more broadly South Africa's issue around public infrastructure, and I think just recently there was a statement from the South African Institute of Civil Engineering that said around half of South Africa's public infrastructure has collapsed or is close to collapsing, and the state of our power grid is almost an almost too perfect example of that more broader data that's been coming through. What is your opinion about where we stand in terms of the maintenance and the health or lack thereof of our power grid?
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. So I believe that the bigger issues is the rollout and planned rollout of electrical distribution throughout the country. This is obviously post-94. And what we did is we rolled out the infrastructure that got electricity to the poor. But what we didn't do at the same time is develop a scheme by which we would actively maintain and then look to the future and see how we could build further. So again, in 94, we had excess capacity. Move now 20 odd years forward, and we're in the brink of I wouldn't call it collapse. There's still power in the system, but the maintenance, the introduction of new supply, that is a major problem.
We've seen almost a revolving door in terms of management as Eskom. Of course, there's a lot of politics involved in that. We've all been watching the news for the last 10 years. But in your opinion, what is the main reason for that a serious issue about the lack of maintenance? Brain drain, of course, being one of them.
I think it's brain drain. It's retirement of people. It's the ability to understand the bigger infrastructure and the interconnectedness of it. So what's happened is you've lost key components. It seemed to be not a problem at the time. And then as you go forward, it is a big problem because of the multiple little small problems. And because of those little small problems, it's become bigger. And now you're playing catch up. And because you're playing catch up, you actually, without the people, without the skills. So, I mean, even if you go back to the old days, where you had technical colleges. Eskom was very proactive in that regard, training young people in the ability to maintain on the ground. Those fell away because they were expensive. The value wasn't necessarily seen, and we were trying to do other things. But it's grassroots, and because of those grassroots elements having disappeared, I can have a head of something, but if I haven't got a body actually doing the work, how do I maintain? How do I develop? How do I grow? And that's really what I see as happened to Eskom.
I think immediately of the fairy tale or the story of the little boy who tried to put his fingers in the cracks of a dam, and of course you end up not having enough fingers to fill all those cracks, and it might be an oversimplification. But perhaps a simple approach is what was needed. Do you think that, for instance, when this latest set of management came into place, that a priority was the engineering department, seeing who's in place? Do they have maintenance plans in place right at grassroots level and all the way up? Because when it comes to that kind of thing, it's the detail that's important, isn't it?
It's always the detail, but now that you're scrambling, so even if I've got good management there, the standard operating procedures and policies don't necessarily deal with this extreme number of events. So yes, the change management happens, and it's going to continue to happen. I've got to look at the top end governance. And this, I then begin to look at things like the policies that how we adjudicate, and if we look at the renewables and the plans around that, and how those haven't been adjudicated or properly conveyed, and therefore we're lagging in that. So if we look at the original rounds of availing towards particularly renewables, if we'd had some of those come on market, we would have got infinitely further ahead of where we are now, which means the time to actually sit and look at the problem properly and say, well, how do I solve this so that it stays fixed? And we're never getting to that stage. We're always behind the curve. And that makes it very difficult for any management. And then even for the guy on the floor who's actually trying to put his finger in the dam, he doesn't have enough fingers and there's no one standing behind him. So how do we build that up? And that's the difficulty that Eskom faces and we as a country face.
This is probably, some would say, a stupid question, but in the engineering world, how important is experience? How important in an engineering department is it to have almost a hierarchy of a senior person who's been there, done that, who's seen it all go wrong, and then passing down that experience further down the ladder to your new graduates in different engineering spheres that are entering that department?
Bit of a loaded question, but certainly it's very important. We all gain experience or knowledge through experience, and therefore you need someone who has that ability to pass down the ideas, the concepts, the abilities. Having said that, of course, technology evolves, and so you can't always necessarily be looking up. Sometimes you do need to be looking down and saying, listen, the young engineers are exposed to new things. They may come out with no experience of how to throw a spanner and what they might be able to do with it. But that is where the guidance does come from your senior side of things. But we've also got to look at saying, how do we adopt, how do we integrate new technologies? And that's from generation through to distribution, through to control, energy management. It all becomes this sort of holistic solution to the bigger problem. But yes, certainly the experience is essential. And particularly if you go down to sort of the generation side of things, you can't say, oh, I've never seen a generator, but I'm going to come and manage a group around that. That becomes very difficult. Having said that, at some stage we had to develop the first generator and no one had the experience, so you built that experience up. We're caught between both places, is we do have that experience around, but that experience is not necessarily accessible all the time. And on the other side, we've got a lot of young talent, but they've got no direction. And so we've got to be starting to bridge that gap. That is, to me, is very important.
Okay, thank you so much for that insight. This engineer, Dr. Andrew Dickson, joining us there. And indeed, that reference to throwing a spanner in the works, at least he didn't say throwing a loose bolt at it, because if you've been following the Eskom story for as long as we all have, that might bring back some bad memories involving Alec Irwin. But we'll leave that for now.